Hi everyone, NICU Mom here. This is my first video from my channel, and I'm going to be talking about my family story from 2013 to 2014. That would be the time that I was pregnant and the diagnoses of what was going on with my son. When my husband and I first found out that we were pregnant, we were super excited. We had planned for it, and when we went to my OB to find out the gender of the baby, we were so excited. It was the morning of, I think we both took off work. It was a couple years ago, so I don't really remember the specifics, but we went together and they did the ultrasound, and I knew that something was wrong when the woman was doing the ultrasound and she wasn't really answering some of my questions. She told us that he was a boy, and we were super excited about that. But then she said, wait right here, I'm gonna go get the doctor. And we went out back into the waiting room, and I was like, this is not supposed to be the way that this goes. Anyhow, we went back into his office, and I've known my OBGYN all of my life. So he knew me very well, and we sat down in his office and he wrote down on a piece of paper the longest word I've up to that point had ever seen in my life, and slid it across the table, and it said umfalocele. Of course I couldn't pronounce it, and I was like, I don't know what this is. What are you trying to tell me? And he said, don't look it up. They only put the worst case scenarios online. He said, do research, read about it. And then he sent me to a particular perinatologist group, and I chose a doctor. And from that point on, went and saw the perinatologist, and I saw him. It was a lot of doctor's appointments. And of course, I was a little older. I was 33, somewhere in there, and 32. And then I had my son when I was 33 in 2014. But it was just really scary hearing the diagnosis, and of course I didn't know what it meant. I didn't even find a support group for a long time. One of my friends had mentioned that she had found something on Facebook. Thank God. It was called MOO, M-O-O, Mothers of Umfaloceles, but there were dads on there, their grandparents, people that had umfaloceles themselves from when they were younger. And it truly was a savior. It gave me information that I really needed to know, and it gave me a forum to actually ask questions. And like, what do you do if your child can't gain weight? What do you do if, how do you feel about tracheing your child? Which was something that we had never thought of. So when we were going to see the perinatologist, there was a moment where we were, he basically said, this is probably going to be, it might be fairly easy. We don't know until he is born, but he will go into the NICU. And at that point, I had no idea what that stood for. Neonatal intensive care unit. So that's really scary once you figure out what that stands for. And he said, once your child is born, he'll be transported by ambulance. What? Ambulance? What do you mean? So I'm at a completely different hospital. My child is taken by ambulance with my husband. Thank God it was only across the street, but he was in a totally different hospital. It was exceedingly painful. The only time I have ever felt that my child was exceedingly safe was when I was pregnant. So once I gave birth and then he was gone, I had to have a C-section. Didn't have to, but we opted to. And I just think it would have been too dangerous. With an omphalocele, you only have a thin layer of skin covering whatever organs are on the outside of the child's body, which later I found out can be any of the organs. It can be all of them, it can be one, and in my son's case, it was his liver and his stomach. And during 9 to 10 weeks of gestation, the umbilical cord sucks out, all of the organs, does its thing, and then they're sent back in. Well, in particular, my umbilical cord was abnormally long, so the liver and the stomach didn't make it back in. And then later I found out that my placenta was diagnosed with fetal thrombotic vasculopathy, which is something that I asked on the Moo forum, hey, did anybody else have this? No one else had it, but everybody, the most responses were that people had knots in their umbilical cord, 1 or 2, so that, didn't give as much oxygen or blood flow to the baby. And what's interesting with this particular diagnosis, it's a midline defect. So you can have eye problems, you can have brain problems, hearing, sight, ear, nose, and throat issues, even going down into your gut. So filling out the line that says, what is your child diagnosed with, is almost a joke, because it's always about just 2 inches long, and I never have enough room to write down everything that my child was diagnosed with at birth. So that's just kind of funny. And not but funny. You've got to find humor everywhere, or else you won't survive. This is actually a really hard video for me to even do, because I'm going back into some things that I didn't really address when I've been in survival mode for almost 7 years. When from the start of when I got pregnant and found out what was going on, I've been in survival mode. So at one point you do have to take charge of yourself, and you have to realize, okay, I've got to take care of me. And that's really hard, because 23 out of the 24 hours a day, you're taking care of your loved one, making their decisions, being their advocate, talking on the phone. Oh, Lord, y'all, I hate talking on the phone. I used to like it. I used to like talking to, certain people for hours, and those people I will still talk to on the phone, but thank God for text messaging and email, because I wouldn't be able to do it. I wouldn't be able to keep up the amount of doctors, nurses, PAs, nursing company, you name it. People checking on Keegan. He's now in school, so all of those phone calls. It's just an incredible amount of people. And even though some of those phone calls are only maybe 2 to 3 minutes, they're asking really hard questions, or they're asking things that I find really petty, and I have to really control my temper. I don't want to get mad at them because they're, checking on him, or, come what may, when, whatever the specific reason is. So the reason I'm doing these videos, number one, is to help me, and also to help people that I know have no clue where to go, no clue who to talk to, don't even know who to ask. I'm trying to make these encouraging. I want you to be an advocate for your child. My son was trached, so therefore he had no voice. I have to ask the questions that he would ask. And if I don't, then he doesn't get anything. Therapies, whatever feeding program he needs to go into, nothing. So, my life has been dedicated dedicated to making sure that he gets his PT, his OT, his speech feeding, his horse therapy. I'm about to enroll him in that. I would like to have him in aqua therapy. Since he had his O repair, which is where he had his abdominal wall closed by skin, he had to do tissue expanders on either side. I'll talk about that later. That was an intense surgery. It was about 8 hours, and they put his liver and his stomach back in, and he has something called malrotation, so nothing is in the place that would be quote unquote normal. So I've been trying for years to see if we can get a feeding tube in his abdomen so we can get the NG tube out of his nose, because my husband and I personally think he would actually probably try and eat some if he didn't have a tube in his nose and tape across his face. When we did decide to trach him, he was 2.5 months old, and he, up until that point, he was intubated, so he had a tube going down his throat into his lungs, tape across his face, all sorts of stuff. You couldn't see him hardly at all. After he was trached, that was the first time I saw his face, and that was amazing. However, he had it for 5 years, almost to the day, which I grew to hate that thing. It got us home faster. It got him healthier faster. Trach change and trach care, being hooked up to a machine to breathe, to a vent. It's just not what you see when you think about starting a family. And that was all that my husband and I wanted, was a family. And we have one, and my kid's amazing. He's absolutely amazing. But he's had a rough go, and we've had some really scary moments. So the main thing I want everybody to get out of this is to ask questions. Make sure you're doing the right thing for your child. What's going to prolong their life? What's going to make them successful? And also, what's going to keep you married? Or whatever your situation is together. However you stay together, you stay together. Because it literally takes a village. This is not something that you can do by yourself. And I know some people are like, nope, I can do it. You can't. Emotionally, it's gonna break you. You might physically be okay, but emotionally it's gonna break you. So you need to stay as strong as possible for your loved one, and me specifically for my child. That's it for today. Be an advocate. Don't look up pictures as soon as you find out what your diagnosis is. And when I was teaching, this was my motto. The more you read, the more you know. Don't look at pictures. All omphalocele, if you're looking at that specifically, are totally different. Totally different. So just read.